Yeah. And we are now live here on the Council Google Plus. I'm John Wilkinson under the guise of the Bible Thumping Wingnet Network, and I'm broadcasting from Washington State, also known as FEMA Region 10. Tonight we have a huge cast of all sorts of people, and we're kind of waiting on Matt Slick to join in if he wants to, and we'll see what happens. Interesting. We were just watching. General Han Solo was actually just kind of sharing a video from Andy Stanley, and I have no problem showing it because I think we're okay to do it because of fair use. Um, I don't think we'll ever get in trouble for it or anything because I mean if
Well, I
if
was thinking of doing my own refutation on my own channel, but
oh, you got it, man. Yeah, we don't want to steal your thunder.
no. By all means, you go ahead. No, I was about to do it, but then I had some other things this morning. But I thought maybe you guys haven't seen the full thing, and
No, we haven't, but I
definitely
know
want
that.
to.
Yeah, James White has been talking about it. I guess this recent Alpha and Omega Ministries
Yeah, I
show.
saw that.
But
He brilliantly showed the importance of the incarnation as much as the resurrection. But
I,
he didn't actually
yeah,
highlight that bit, which is
right.
really bad.
You want to fill
Yeah.
in what he was saying for the listeners?
Basically, by the time the prophet Malachi was around, the Jews. So in Malachi 1:11, God through Malachi is saying that His name will be great among the Gentiles. And according to Andy Stanley, um, the Jews listening to that would have responded by saying, "No, people mock your name. You're the worst." Paraphrasing Andy Stanley, you're the worst of all the other gods. Like maybe Zeus would be better than you. And my simple question to Andy Stanley would be, yeah, since when did the Jews even talk like that, even at the time of Malachi? And not only that, but when God was being a little bit absent from His own people, the very next verses, 12 and 13, explain why. It's because of the lack of reverence that the Jews were giving to their own God. It had nothing to do with God failing them. It was laziness, really. So totally butchered God's sovereign grace through the Old Testament.
Did Andy Stanley give any kind of reference or any kind of uh, just where was the
Yeah,
sources on
he,
this?
he oh, reference as in apart from the scripture he's reading from.
Exactly. Yeah. I want to know
Right.
where did he get this idea?
He didn't say. It's literally just spouted. I've even gone down seeing if the liberal scholars are saying this sort of thing, and none of them say this.
Coming straight from his head, huh?
Yeah, that's what it sounds
I,
like.
I honestly think so, yeah. I honestly think that's the case.
He's just making it up as he goes. Yeah, that's great. Hmm.
Must have come to him in a vision.
Yeah, probably.
Written
I
on
mean,
gold plates.
he's been saying that there's no Bible. Again, we don't say the Bible we have today was, at the time of the apostles, but they did have a Bible. It was the Old Testament. Then he said that there's no Exodus, there's no evidence for the Exodus, there's no evidence for Jericho. Um, you know, so the only thing that matters is the resurrection. So, like James White said, you have all this so-called wrong and fake and myth, and God's name being tarnished, supposedly. And then the resurrection somehow does away with all that. It it makes no sense. Interestingly, like in the video I was going to make, I was going to show strategic plans God was doing with Abraham, and Abraham fully understood. I mean, look at Hebrews 11, the faith passage. The author of Hebrews must be wrong by saying that Abraham fully understood why he was doing what he was doing, in light of God's promises and all that. I mean, that passage alone is like a chronological highlight of the entire Old Testament. Did Andy Stanley forget about Hebrews 11?
Exactly. Yeah, Hebrews 11 does come to mind.
It's probably part of the myth part of his Bible, where he's got like myth and actual.
He says in that sermon, he says, "Oh, we don't know why God chose Abraham. It was just a lucky, choice. It was just, happenstance." No, Deuteronomy 32 highlights the reason why, and then that geographical reason is then applied in Acts 2 in Pentecost, and there's like a beautiful, type and antitype taking place. I'm honestly astonished that he has a huge audience that can listen to him speak like this.
Well, I mean, nowadays people will listen to anything. I mean, it's really not even, they're not even thinking anymore. Basically, the pastors nowadays will go and just speak whatever they want and not have anything as a backup. As an educational reference of what they're talking about. I mean, they'll just make anything up, and as long as they walk out of there feeling happy and a warm, fuzzy feeling, that's pretty much what it comes down to. So we have Jordan. Jordan showed up.
Yeah, that's me.
He's the local atheist. Okay, guys, attack.
No, I think I'll be putting you on the defensive this time.
Oh, okay.
All
What do you got?
So I got a question, but I need to probably provide a little bit of context so you know what answer I'm looking for. So in science, whenever someone makes a claim, there need to be verifiability criteria. If they're going to be taken seriously, they need to show that they got to asserting a claim for a particular reason, and if that reason is shown to be wrong or flawed or something like that, or we're given reason to think otherwise, then they're willing to admit that their assertion was wrong. So I was talking with Greg Kogel. I don't know if you guys know him, but I asked him about this, and he suggested that instead of trying to test God, I should try to reason to God abductively. Try to look for the best explanation for, or come up with a theory for how the world works, and evaluate whether the God theory makes more sense. But what I failed to point out to him at the time is that even abductive claims, theories, not just observations. Observations need to be kind of tested or repeated, but the theories themselves have to be tested too. So so that's kind of the context for what I want to ask. So theists have a theory about God, and how do we go about testing that? What would be the verification criteria? What would not only say to us that it's true, but what theoretically, at least, would change their minds on that? The way I would phrase it, I'll phrase it this way: is how do you, or what do you trust God to do in this life for you, and what would God have to do or fail to do in order for you to realize that your trust in God was misplaced?
Well, it's kind of multifaceted, but I want to say hi, Jordan.
Hi, how you doing, Matt?
I'm doing pretty good. I haven't talked in a few months, so and saw you pop in there, and Vincent let me know that you came on. So, so what's your first question? We'll just tackle one at a time.
Yeah, it's kind of that's the thing. Like, the answer is, even though I say it as two questions, but the answer kind of has to answer both at the same time by its nature. What do you trust God to do, and how would you realize that that trust was misplaced?
Well, I believe in the Christian God because He's revealed it to us, and He's regenerated my heart, and therefore I have placed my hope and trust in Him to save me from my sins. I've come to that realization since He took out my heart of stone and gave me a heart of flesh, and granted me faith and repentance to believe in the gospel. That is what Scripture clearly delineates is, a process of salvation there. It's His work. So I think that answers both of them, right?
Okay, if you could kind of list it as bullet points, I want to try to take a note of this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How would you say that?
Well, the biblical revelation asserts that men have general revelation of God's existence, of the Christian God's existence, because He's the one that manifests in them. Romans 18 and Romans 1:18 and following. Read that pericope of verses there, and men hold that truth down in suppression by idolatry. If they don't worship the true and living God, they will worship anything else. Man, his intellect, their own autonomous, idolized free will, things in creation, things that are even subhuman. Man's been given dominion and authority over things in creation, yet man worships beasts, animals, things like that. Subhuman idolatry, where it's that depth of depravity. But the biblical revelation is, if a person is to be saved from their sins, it does take God's sovereign work in regeneration, changing their heart from a heart of stone, of that willful suppression, because they're slaves of sin.
Hey, Matt, if you don't mind, I guess, are there promises that God made to you that you trust Him to fulfill, I guess?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have the hope of future resurrection and glory in His presence, hope of a restored creation.
Are you asking for things right now in this life? Is that what you're looking for?
Well, yeah, that could be construed in different ways. Right.
But because it would be testable if that's the case. Yeah, if it's something in this life. Does God promise you anything in this life?
Yeah, trials and tribulations.
Trials, tribulations, persecution, and eternal life. So there you go. Woohoo! There's blessings in obeying God's commands, even though when we're persecuted and going through trials and things like that. But those are definite promises, though. And then we have the eternal promises of God, once the end times come. So. It can be multifaceted. So,
Okay. You said blessings and obedience. That's.
mhm.
I think. Let's say. Is that? I guess it's not quite. Are you saying that God actively bestows these, or does obedience kind of naturally lead to blessing, or in a sense,
Mhm.
or
Yeah,
does it?
because with violation of God's law, there is inherent punishment. Because of that disobedience, there'll
So
be
it's
temporal.
kind of like just action and consequence then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
So I guess my question would then be, what part does God play in that?
I believe he plays all the role in sanctification. We have a volitional will, and Philippians 2:13 sums up pretty nicely. For is God who is at work in you, both to will and to do his good pleasure. So, for the Christian, of course. So,
I think I missed something. Did you say that
Mhm.
God influences your will? Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. God influences your will. What does that mean exactly?
I mean, since we have a regenerate heart, we've had our heart of stone taken out, we're given a heart of flesh. Therefore, we have we've become, as Romans 6 puts it, you were once slaves of sin, you're now slaves of righteousness. That term used there is doulos, slave. And that is a dichotomy of the Bible. A person is either a slave to sin or a slave to righteousness, and that's the distinguishing factor between the unregenerate man and the regenerate man. So it is God's work that we be sanctified. Sanctification has different connotations that we are set apart. The elect are set apart from their mother's womb, actually before the foundation of the world, Ephesians chapter 1. And then we also go through a process of growing in holiness after conversion as well. So those are two different connotations of sanctification.
So does that mean that whenever someone who doesn't believe still wants certain good things, or they do good things, is that desire and that action still coming from God, or could that still be coming from them if they're an unbeliever?
You talking about temporal blessings that even the unregenerate enjoy?
Perhaps, if that's
Yeah, there's lots of temporal blessings that undeserved, namely. That's why we call them common grace of God is unmerited, graciousness extended towards them. But that's distinguishable from his redemptive particular love. For his elect. And regenerate do have enjoyment of many blessings and gifts of God. Namely, he's the one who's keeping your heart beating, food to sustain your life as well, good things that you experience in this life, family, friends, humor, sex, probably, all those things are pleasurable things that are a gift of God. So, but they have to be, done in the right way, of course. They do experience enjoyment, wealth, prosperity. Even the argument of, I think it's Psalms. It asks a question. Why does the wicked prosper? It's not necessarily a bad thing to have those things, but it's to give glory to God for those things, for those gifts that you do have. And this is what the unregenerate do. Romans 1, neither thankful, but become vain in their imagination. The heart was darkened by this suppression of where things actually truly come from. They suppress the knowledge of the Creator. So, does that help?
it seems to be missing something. I do have a decent list here. I've got 7 items here, but
All right.
now I think each of these, to verify each of the items, you know, how do we test them? What is the criteria that would say, oh, this wasn't true like I thought it was? We give credit, or you give credit to God that He keeps you alive, but
That's one of them. Yeah.
what would have to be presented to you for you to realize that He doesn't?
Well, this is what we get into when we were debating last time, is contrast of two worldviews, antithetical to each other. And believe in Christianity because God has revealed it to be certain, of course, His absolute revelation to every man, woman, and child, because He made it manifest. He's the one who did the manifesting. And therefore, if anyone wants to come contrary to the Christian worldview, he has to present a coherent, logically consistent worldview that can account for such things we experience and give a grounding for those things. I just don't see it coming from materialistic naturalism and evolution. We can discuss those things, but it's also demonstrated by God's revelation and also by the impossibility of the contrary. Every worldview that's contrary to Christianity, that would include atheism. So,
yeah, I the way I say it, the problem is, Jordan, you're kind of piggybacking on what Matt said. You're using criteria that each worldview is going to come to the knowledge of truth in a different way. Whereas in Christianity, we're coming to truth by revelation, by a revelation from God, where you want to find truth, the knowledge of truth, by more of a scientific means of observation and those things. Well, that's not how you prove Christianity correct. That's not, because you're operating on a completely different worldview. So,
But I think we could probably agree that the scientific method is very useful, right?
in certain things, yeah.
Useful and infallible are two different things, also. So that would be the problem. There's problems with the scientific method. First of all, the scientific method is inherently circular in logic. You can't, how do you prove that the scientific method is true? Because you test the scientific method over and over and over again. That's how you come to say that the scientific method is true. It's circular. It's like us saying God's true because He declared it in the Bible.
I don't think I agree with that, but it's kind of distracting from my original question. Are you saying you don't have criteria that God would betray your trust?
Well, yeah, because again, because you would base criteria of, okay, I shouldn't trust that based on using the scientific method. You observe something different, and therefore, okay, well, that's not the answer, and that's the criteria you are going to use. That's not the same type of criteria that we are going to use. We're not going to use the scientific method or something like it to come to the knowledge of truth. The problem is we have a revelatory epistemology. That's how we know truth, and it's you don't. It
Right.
comes with a trust, a complete and utter trust and submission to that. Whereas science and the scientific method kind of more or less dictates what you believe, rather than you submitting to science as we completely submit to God and His revelation.
Right. It shows the correlation between your metaphysic and your epistemology, that they're inherently intertwined. Therefore, if you have naturalistic presuppositions, metaphysic, only the physical world, natural law, whatever you call that is the only things that exist, and therefore you're an empiricist to the hilt, then, well, your own epistemology is not under that criteria either, because, it's a philosophy which stems from your metaphysic, and you got to account for how you get epistemology from that metaphysic, how you get knowing from your matter under physical laws, and without it going poof. And then somehow you got to account for rationality, not just mere sentience, but rational thinking versus irrational thinking. And it's on the basis of just naturalistic processes, then there'd be no argument from anyone that would disagree with you, because they just evolved a different way under that. But there's a whole host of things that you have to bridge that gap. And that shows inherently that your epistemology that's being put forth as scientific methodism doesn't fit its own criteria it could be judged by. It's just asserted that this took place, and that's inherently contradictory. So that's the presuppositions you'll view, the lens you'll view anything contrary to your worldview through. The evidence, things we in our experience and things like that. But where we have to address the fundamental coherence or incoherence between your metaphysics and your epistemology. Those are going to be important questions that need to be answered. So.
Well,
there's a lot. So.
Thanks for trying to answer the question, I guess. Yeah, I just feel like the metaphysics that you're using is it's rendering your God indefensible. Frankly, that's what I am.
Okay, how?
As Matt Slick has put it, God is outside of all categories, and to put God in a category is apparently flawed somehow, and because all metaphysical entities apparently stem from him, whatever that means, and I can't wrap my head around to that, because it doesn't make sense to me to say that God, for example, made logic, and then to say that God is himself consistent. That doesn't make sense to me.
Well, he didn't make logic. Logic is a reflection of God's mind, and then therefore he is transcendent above his creation. And since we're creating his image, we ought to think logically. He imposes his as part of his governance, his will, of course, that he's a standard, and therefore we ought to do what is right, and therefore think logically. There's never a point when logic did not exist, because there was never a point where God never not existed. So he's eternal, and therefore, as the eternal creator, his transcendent governorship over his creation, his creatures ought to think logically. Of course, that's his. That'd be part of his prescriptive will, and that's why we ought to think this way and not illogically. There is
okay,
an
so
ought
are you saying? So instead of saying that God created logic, he is consistent, and therefore we can talk about God in logical terms?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Rational term, yeah, of course, yeah. God is the law of identity, and it's not like it's not some standard outside of himself or anything like that. From the Christian perspective, he is the I want to say author, because it's having a term of like generating, or it did not exist, now exists. No, it's a reflection of God's of how he thinks and how we ought to think as creatures created in his image. So therefore, that's why we experience transcendentals like that, things that are transcendental, that transcend both space and time. No matter when you are in the physical universe, or no matter where you are in the physical universe, they are true.
Right. Okay. So maybe your thinking on this is different from what I've seen from some of the other presuppositionalists. So
well, we do distinguish categories between what we call the laws of logic, which are a reflection of God's character, but that's the thing where we can distinguish the origin point of them, so to speak. Origin of creation, we say God and his ability to create, and therefore we'd have such things in our experience as logical thinking, things like that, as creatures created in his image. That'd be one of the communicable attributes, of course. We share knowledge with God, or knowledge itself, even though he has infinite knowledge on omniscience. We don't have that omniscience quality, but we do know things. And we can love, and we have a sense of justice, of course, and love. And so these things are communicated. There's communicable attributes and incommunicable attributes of God.
okay. So okay. I asked Matt a question last time on Slick Answers that tried to I don't know if you saw it, but it was about figuring out what God is, I guess you could say. So my question to him was, is God a universal entity or a particular entity? That was the gist of the question I asked him. Is God himself a kind of thing, or I guess that's not quite phrasing it right. Is God so universals are the relationships between entities. And at the same time, we can think of universals as entities themselves sometimes, especially in, I think, the metaphysics that you're using. So the particular entities are the entities that actually have properties. With those definitions in mind, I guess, is God a universal entity, just a metaphysical entity, or a particular entity, an entity that just has these properties but isn't a property himself?
Of course, he's metaphysical, of course, because he is the creator of all things temporal. I'm trying to think of the categories you're breaking down there. Particular universal, well, he's revealed himself as a trinity of persons, one being, three persons, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. And as eternal creator, creating the temporal realm that which creatures, angels, man, and the man is created in God, in the Imago Dei, in God's image. We have in his revelation, he's just displaying his attributes, revealing to us the attributes that he has. So I'm not sure if you're conflating properties with attributes, or if you want to say what God is, we could say God's a Trinity, God is Spirit. I don't know what Trinity is. I already explained the definition there. What the Trinity is, the doctrine of the Trinity. But it could be multifacetedly answered. God is a Trinity. God is Spirit. He's incorporeal. Second person of the Trinity became incarnate, took on human flesh. The Son died on the cross, was buried, resurrected, died, was resurrected on the third day. It could be how deep you want to go. So multifaceted answers to that, and we take it as a whole in our revelational epistemology. So
okay. Yeah, I think when I looked back and reviewed my conversation with Matt, I remembered that the interesting thing about particulars and universals is that drawing a line between them is almost.
Okay. You're trying to make the doctrine of Trinity actually answers that. You're talking about the one in the many issue, right? Right?
Perhaps
One in the many. Okay.
I've heard of that before.
Right. That's how the Christian world we can account for why we have such. Just take for example human nature. We're all made in the imago Dei, but we're different persons. Now, God's ontology, we'd say, the very essence and nature of his being. He is one being, but the three different and distinct persons, they share the same nature. Now, there's nothing in creation that actually parallels this, because God's nature is absolutely unique. There's nothing in creation that parallels him, but we can have some analogous hints to it, of course. But it does account for the one and the many issue. We can have materialistic particulars in our experience, yet we apprehend universals, transcendent universals, such as laws of logic.
I guess, okay, you say that he solves the one and the many problem. I guess I'm not quite understanding how he does that.
This is very essence and nature of God's being. Therefore, we have that reflection even represented in creation. Because from materialistic naturalism, let's just take that. If you're a naturalist materialist to the hilt, and empiricist to the hilt, you cannot make any. You couldn't. Otherwise, you'd be making a hasty generalization every time you did it, because you have only limited experience of materialistic particulars. You cannot get from that a generality at all. It'd be a fallacy of hasty generalization, which is a fallacy, of course, to say this applies at all times, all places, because I've had this limited experience. How do you make that logical leap? It's absurdity.
I don't think how do I'm not even sure how to address what.
You know what the issue is there? I mean, that's the thing. If you are,
it's like if I observe a pattern among multiple particular entities,
a limited pattern, limited experience. You've only observed a limited pattern.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Right.
I make an inference, or I infer that that there's this property that they have in common.
Yeah. Okay. Like an attribute or something. You know, like.
Okay. I think when someone goes to say, you know, all X's have this property, it could be thought of as kind of like it's a tentative inference, one that could be subject to revision. But
all of them?
At the same time, some of them are just kind of taken as a definition. So anything that differs from the definition is, by that definition, something different, right?
Yeah, you use like a bachelor, of course. Definition of a bachelor is an unmarried man.
Right.
Where do you get that from? Materialistic processes. I mean, we're already like 5 steps down the line. You haven't even accounted for even how you get abstractions from materialistic and naturalistic processes. We're already arguing on what we say it's transcendental by definition, but how you can get definitions, abstractions, et cetera, for merely naturalistic processes. This is just overskirted by,
like it's not possible to just form a pattern in my mind that is patchwork. I can't do that.
Where does this come from? It would be the actual question. The abstraction is an abstract idea, of course. The idea of an unmarried man, ipso facto, unmarried man is a bachelor. How do we apprehend this from your worldview? But that's the thing. You just can't just take for granted abstraction. You need to give me empirical. If you're not employing a double standard, and I'm going to hold you to your own worldview, then you can give me empirical data explaining how you get abstractions from merely naturalistic processes, which is different than me combining, X number of chemicals together and it just, doing what it does. I just find this not answered from the atheistic worldview. If they're really an empiricist, I'm only going to believe this if you actually logically explain this without any poofery. Yeah, just about poofery. That's all I find coming from the atheist world.
To use a specific example, which I think would be helpful. I guess are we so like what I do in order to identify a bachelor is I use the criteria of the definition, right? So I see, are they a man and are they married? If they are a man but they're not married, then that's what I define as a bachelor, right?
Mm-hmm. It's an abstraction, right? It's not a material thing. You don't go out and find, the definition. The definition itself is itself an abstraction, which we can actually put down on paper and write in.
Yeah, we can talk about it.
And we can, of course, we can talk about it, of course. Where's your grounding for such a thing coming from your metaphysic?
I feel like I don't know quite what you're asking for.
Well, I thought the last time we talked, you and Doug was the other guy, at least two atheists I was conversing with, and you're both putting forth evolution, so inherently you're materialistic naturalist from your metaphysical point of view. So therefore, there is only material matter and physical laws that exist in the universe. That's it, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So you have to answer is how you get abstractions from that. How do you get chemicals abstracting empirically?
So what is the process of abstraction then?
I'd say it's a mind apprehension, because we're carrying the imago Dei. We're both a physical being and a spiritual. We have a soul.
So you're asking for how abstraction works in a naturalistic machine.
Now, how do you even get it? Yeah, how do you even get it? If you want to say how that works, well, yeah, empirically show me.
How do you what do you mean by get it?
Well, the very thing, this is where I find naturalism, used to say the scientific methodist, the method, all knowledge comes from the five senses. But the very assertion itself is not proven by the five senses. Therefore, it's self-refuting. Naturalism self-implodes. It's a contradiction.
No, not quite.
Yes, it is. All knowledge is gained through the five senses, or not?
It's a misunderstanding of what is being said about empiricism. Is that empiricism is the all knowledge about something in particular can come through the senses. It's not that
a priori knowledge.
What?
You have a priori knowledge then? Is not all a posteriori knowledge? Is not all from experience? But this is where you have a conflict here between it's only material matter under physical laws, and then somehow it's not unguided, and it just went poof, it just started abstracting, right? And from henceforth, any knowledge would be, I mean, you haven't explained that one, but let's just at least take it for granted and went poof. From there, it's sentient and only has experience to draw from for any knowledge, right? Therefore, it'd only be.
I think abstraction is I guess what I would call a high-level cognitive ability. But what does that come from, I think? And maybe that would help answer your question, is that if we were to reduce it down or look back in the evolutionary history, one of the kind of synonyms of knowledge is awareness. So in a sense, like a simpler form of knowledge is feeling or sensing, right? So to know something is to just sense it. You know, like you're talking about like an individual light sensitive cell, then it knows that there's light when that light hits it because there's a mechanism for that. Now, of course, we've come a long way since then. So it's kind of like a high level code in a computer. It's quite removed from the hardware in a sense, because there's you know, there's multiple levels of processing going on there.
Okay, so let's say it did this thing. I'm not hearing. I'm hearing general poofery. Not you know, describing what you're saying. It's just you're not really getting down to brass tacks particulars here of just, hey, I can lay out this scientific formula and this is really how it spawns consciousness. Here's an issue I find, not only with the other things I've already laid out, but here's just another one just to throw out there is, okay, the thing begins thinking. Is it thinking rationally? How do you get from...
Is what thinking?
This self-conscious thing, is it thinking rationally?
That depends. What is rational thinking?
That's a very thinking question we're talking about. But here's a conundrum here. At what point do you get, how do you get it rationally thinking? And what do you define as that? And how does the, so to speak, fork in the road happen? Because we have disagreements to this day. Where did these come from? Where did the split happen? If it began thinking rationally and then something spawned from it and began thinking irrationally, on what basis is it irrational? And how does this fork in the road even happen? Why didn't it just evolve to think rationally all the time? You know, I never heard an answer to this one either. But just throw out another thing. We've already gone over a whole host of problems. This is just another one. And I've already shown the logical contradiction that evolution presupposes naturalism, naturalism self-refuting, there goes evolution. I mean, it's just, there's so many things I can throw out that are entailed in this to show the self-refuting nature of naturalism, and we can just pick and choose which one we want to focus on, but it's a whole host because systematically it falls. If your system inherently has contradiction and logical contradiction, your system falls. You need to get a new worldview.
See, the problem with making these assertions is that the problem is communicating it to someone else, and so if we're failing to communicate this to someone else, then
thinking logically here, if I put myself in your worldview as in the realm of materialistic naturalism, that's all we have to work with.
Yeah, if there is a contradiction that you see in my worldview,
yeah,
you're not doing a good job of communicating it to me.
Okay.
Not that I mean that as a you know, an insult or anything. It's just that's a matter of fact. I'm not seeing the objection you're trying to make.
Yeah. I think number one, the main problem is you don't get an epistemology from materialistic naturalism. Not merely asserting it went poof, and you're still trying to answer it. Otherwise, you're just giving an incoherent proofread. You would not require of an empiricist. If an empiricist said, I'm you know, to the hilt, I just believe this went poof. Can't explain how it actually happened, but that's the very nature of science, is to explain how. Even Dawkins says, no, we only explain the how. We don't explain the why. We explain the how. Well, I'm asking for the how. To the hilt. So
okay, in science, when we're talking about explanation, the explanations are speculative, but they're based on observations, which are generally repeatable.
Okay.
So
you have observations of abstractions, their very nature, their essence, their ontos.
No, which is why I don't think abstractions are. Yeah, I don't think abstractions are real in a sense.
Wow. So what's the scientific method again?
Making observations and trying to form explanations for that.
It's a method which is an abstraction. He said science denies
Sure.
abstractions.
Wait, what?
The scientific method itself is an abstraction.
Okay.
The scientific method, a thing that you find in nature. You go out and look under a rock, you find the scientific method. It's an abstraction. But then you're saying the very nature of science itself,
Science is
what it depends on is abstraction. Yeah, it's denying.
Okay, yeah, the scientific method is something we do. So, like, we are the thing that exists, and we do things.
Right.
And scientific investigation is one of those things.
Yeah, it only deals with that which can be empirically defined, tested, which is via sense perception.
So to ask for empirical evidence of a process or like a verb, and like an action, like that doesn't make sense to me, because it's not that we care about whether the action exists as an independent entity. The independent entity is the thing that performs the action. And so therefore the action is a dependent entity, one that we kind of talk about, but one that doesn't have its own existence.
So therefore you cannot scientifically prove that the scientific method is actually valid, because it's not susceptible to its own criteria. It's an abstraction, yet it deals with only things that are non-abstractions.
It's a procedure, not an abstraction.
It is an abstraction which delineates a procedure. It makes the qualifiers of, we're only going to look at sense perception things, but it's the very methodology which you employ, but the methodology you employ is an abstraction in and of itself. That's the very thing an issue. So therefore it cannot even account for abstraction. It presupposes abstraction, but that's the very nature I was asking. You don't get this epistemology. It correlates with your metaphysics because you just assume materialistic naturalism, but you don't explain how you even get an epistemology from it. You just take it for granted. Oh, well, this is where the correlation happens. We're going to look at materialistic particulars. That's because you presuppose a metaphysic that entails that. So that's why your epistemology is going to correlate, but it doesn't account for the gap, leaping gap you have there of generating abstraction from materialistic particulars.
That's just word salad.
I think that he's misunderstanding something about
that's just like
the abstraction.
If you want to degenerate the debate to that, it's just a word salad. I say everything he says is word salad. If you actually understood these terms,
I do understand them. You don't.
Well, then it's not word salad.
Yeah, Matt.
Follow logical progression of what I was laying out, because I'm laying out in a certain manner. You're just saying, well, that's just a word salad, as if to demean what I was laying out.
Because the referents don't refer to anything.
Yes, they do.
No, they don't. There's no such thing as science, and science doesn't prove things.
There's no such thing as science. Okay.
Right.
That, Jordan?
Science is a method. It's not a thing.
Yeah, okay, what do you mean? Okay, what do you mean to say that by that is that science is not an independent entity?
That's right.
It's not
Jordan is correct. Jordan is correct. It's not a thing. You're committing the reification error. You're thinking that science is a thing that exists out there in the world. It is not. It's a procedure that people use.
It's an abstract methodology. That's what it is.
There's nothing abstract.
So abstractions don't exist?
I didn't say abstractions don't exist.
That's what you're
not an abstraction.
Yes, it is. It's a method.
Is my walking to the store an abstraction?
That's a physical action.
If we're not clear about
our definitions,
we're going to start talking about
before you get to the evidence, you think I need to only look at such and such. It's not itself a materialistic thing.
No, we don't. We don't think that.
The scientific method.
You believe that based on your metaphysics, which is just physical matter and physical laws. That's exactly what you affirm metaphysically. There is no supernatural. It's only what you think is natural. Materialistic particulars under physical laws. Can't account where either one of them came from, but that's what you take as ground zero.
Why do you need to account for where they came from?
That's my question to you.
Why do you need to do that?
We don't.
Because it's absurd. You don't get it.
That's
not an answer. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. You don't get it, and none has been provided on how you get it. Therefore, you're not even.
Why do you need to get it? Saying that we don't get it does not mean that it needs to happen. I'm asking why you need.
I'm not saying you don't get it. I'm saying your worldview is self-refuting.
You just said 3 times that we don't get it. So why do you need to get the origin of things? in order to understand what
So
exists
atheism
now.
cannot provide these.
A, I'm not an atheist, but B, you're not answering the question.
Well, that's the worldview.
Yeah, this isn't dependent upon theism or atheism. This is a
Yeah,
so the naturalistic worldview is not
science
atheist?
is neither theistic nor atheistic. It's
because I know theists
It doesn't have
that-
God
that-
in it from your perspective, right?
I know theists that are nominalists that don't think that the abstract is that it consists of independent entities.
That doesn't necessarily matter.
Wait, rephrase that so I can understand what you're.
Well, you know about like Platonic realism, Aristotelian realism, nominalism. You know those terms?
Plato had the problem. Couldn't get it without asserting deity, of course. They get the two things in the same realm. You got a chicken and egg problem.
Hey, let me interrupt real fast, guys. John had PC problems, so we might be going off air. After we do, I want to thank everyone who's participated. We're having technical difficulties.
All right.
Gotcha. Hope he can get back in time. But the point that I was making earlier is that the scientific method works on the basis of coherence. If you use it and you come up with something that is incoherent, then you've defeated the method.
Doesn't count for coherence. That's the very thing I'm asking for you to account for, coherence.
It asks for coherence. It's not something that needs to account for coherence. It's not that's not what it's used for.
You're assuming coherence exists, can be attained.
No, coherent. What do you mean by coherence? Like the law of non-contradiction? The law of non-contradiction, right?
Everything, all the results of the scientific method are supposed to cohere with one another. Once you come up with something that is incoherent, does not cohere with the rest of evidence, then you have a question.
Defines coherence.
We're assuming that the universe is going to be consistent. If it's not consistent, and that's the truth of the matter, then there's a whole new exploration that needs to take place. But that so far has not happened.
Well, there are problems. There are outstanding issues within science. There are
right,
outstanding questions. There are outstanding
which are being
questions.
investigated, right?
Yes,
Just
exactly. Science is provisional. It doesn't give you absolute truth. Science doesn't give you truth. It gives you facts. That's right. It gives you facts.
Well, there are no
it essentially attempts to provide coherent meaning to the universe. And if you're in a situation in which you cannot provide coherent meaning, or if the universe is incoherent, then the method is a bad method for finding the answers to those questions.
But I'm asking, where do you get coherence from? That's a big philosophical problem.
Why does that matter? That doesn't have
No, I'm saying
to do with
it's
scientific
philosophy
method.
itself. It is the philosophy of science, and in philosophy, we're accounting for coherence or incoherence.
Right, that's a philosophical question, not a scientific question.
No, because scientific methodology
is
itself a philosophy. You
right.
want to tell
it's kind of the result of philosophy,
but not addressing its underlying philosophy itself.
Right. So in order to do that,
you're saying
you start to go into philosophical questions.
Philosophy, and I'm challenging you on the philosophy.
I'm not saying
not on the method.
You might be confused.
And Matt, I would agree. You do have to do philosophy in order to do science. I would agree there.
It has philosophical.
He's not letting me talk. Can you let me talk for a second so that I can explain what the problem with what you're saying is? All right. So science is the result of philosophy, essentially.
No kidding. That's exactly what I was saying. So I wasn't misunderstanding. Right. You have to put it down.
I don't think that you understand what you're misunderstanding.
No, I was right on target.
No, you're not. So if you stop interrupting me for a second, then we can get to it.
You can dial back. I was right on point.
No, I'm not going to dial back.
And you go, well, why do we need to account for coherence?
Guys, it looks like we were talking past each other for a bit, but I think
I'm attempting to explain myself. You're not letting me do it. I'm not going to be dialing back.
Dial back machine gun.
No.
You did. You came in guns blazing. Okay, good. Put him out. Because he just came in. You don't know what you're talking about. No, we were right on point. We were right on point. I was addressing the very key issues that needed to be addressed. He's just bloviating. I think you don't understand. Or why do we need to account for this? Well, because that's the very issue we were discussing before he came in guns blazing. Now, I'm saying if you are a materialist to the hilt, if you are a true empiricist in your epistemology, to the hilt, be consistent. Don't just jump ship when the going gets tough and go, oh, I got to jump over to this here. And then you're just abandoning your core epistemology. Christian doesn't do that and can't do that. You can be consistent across the board. I'm just asking the empiricist to do that without changing the goalposts, so to speak, of just abandoning their core epistemology. Can you really hold to it to the hilt when you get down to these issues? really a method derived from what you philosophically presuppose, but your philosophy itself, right between metaphysics and epistemology, have Onson called dialectical tensions. You just, well, I'm an empiricist once I have material matter here and this method of doing it, but I can't account for the very method itself, which is an abstraction. But how did I get that abstraction from materialistic, naturalistic process? Purely material matter under physical laws just went, and it started generating. All of a sudden, you got poof, logic, rationality,